Yeah, hi. My name is John Garrison. I work on the bank's Global Civil Society team, and I haven't read Gianpaolo's paper, but I just wanted to share some of my experiences with the Porto Alegre budgeting process. I think definitely it was very significant for Brazil. I mean, you could argue that it's one of the reasons that Lula was elected was because that's where the PT began. Its work was in Porto Alegre. Also, it spawned in some ways the World Social Forum, which is the most significant global social civil society movement to date. And the bank was involved in that process through various studies and conferences. I took the World Bank Vice President back in 2002 to meet with the mayor there at the time. On the other hand, I think it has perhaps more of a symbolic value than in terms of really changing the decision-making process there. If I understand it correctly, I mean, the participatory budgeting process was only actually dealing with 10% of the budget of the city of Porto Alegre because 90% of it was in salaries and other fixed costs. And so there's like a 10 or so percent developmental budget that they dealt with. Plus, it was never clear to me the relationship between the participatory budgeting and the city council. In some ways, it was sort of undermining the role of city council because the city council was seen as sort of elitist, and so the participatory budgeting, but that has a long-term impact to see that. In addition, after the Workers' Party lost both the city government and the state government, I think the participatory budgeting there was scaled back a lot. Just recently, though, the mayor at the time was just elected governor of Rio Grande do Sul just 2 weeks ago. So I think it'll probably be coming back, at least at the state level. And as many of you know as well, the World Social Forum itself has lost a lot of steam. You know, once it left Porto Alegre, sir, we had a lot of state support from Petrobras and others. So, I think I was wondering if you could comment if it really has been significant in terms of changing the deliberative structures there, or it's been just more of a symbolic importance of involving citizens in decision-making, and if it's been more episodic than permanent, at least the Porto Alegre experience.
This is the last question. And Archon. So we have 2 more questions. Okay. Gianpaolo will have all of 5 glorious minutes.
I'll make it quite fast. And I'm Kevin Harris. I'm coming from Baltimore and Johns Hopkins, and living in Baltimore, you realize that one of the themes that I've been picking up a lot on the talks and responses is that we've been decoupling deliberation and decentralization. I mean, because Baltimore is decentralized in many of its structures, especially in its governance structures or lack of, and that's very clear. And so the question is how deliberation play into that, and how, as this idea transfers internationally, one thing I was really interested in is who are the agents that are taking the ideas, and is this trending over time in a particular way? Who are the agents, and how are they introducing it? Through what mechanisms are they introducing it in particular cities, and then what are they asking for over time? Because as Peter mentioned, there's I mean, I can see this happening, and participatory budgets ending up as agents of NIMBY agents, not in my backyard, right? So if I participate in the budget to keep out. I mean, other. So you're using decentralization as a tool to shut down deliberation. So I was wondering if you could just speak on that.
Yeah, I want to thank you because the paper really made my day. It's the best piece of kind of political news I've had for months and months, actually. Which is the same. No, but right, maybe it's a low bar. But I see it as a very, 3/4 full story for the following reason. If you think not of the participatory budget as a program or an innovation, but rather as an idea standing for a set of values, right? So think of part of our job in this room not as program evaluators or trying to figure out whether a particular initiative works well or not, but rather in producing ideas that may result in social progress down the road, right? And so the fact that it has been monocropped and adapted is an indicator primarily of how receptive the field is of many societies are to this set of to the idea and the set of values that the participatory budget stands for, right? And of course, it would be better if it weren't co-opted, if there were social forces who could emphasize the social justice element in all of those places, if the implementers did it not unthinkingly, but with more adaptation. But nevertheless, it's an idea with an enormous amount of power, and I think that's an important dimension to focus on rather than the details of the program and its implementation and assessment, right? And so think of it as an idea out there like vouchers or tradable pollution permits, right? Those things can be implemented more well or less well. Those also are particular measures standing for a set of ideas and values, right? And that's the important thing about them. And kind of the amazing thing about this particular idea is that it has spread very widely without the help primarily of many philanthro-capitalists or even capitalists. It's just spread.
Giampaolo.
Well, thank you for all those extremely thoughtful comments. I have, let me make a plug for 2 books. So one book, Baiocchi, Heller, and Silva, in your bookstores, March 2011, discusses the Brazil cases. It's called Bootstrapping Democracy. So that was the research that came from. I wanted to mention that. And then this other book, which is an ethnography of the process of implementation in Cordoba and in Chicago. Let me just say a couple of things about Chicago, since people are probably curious about that. All your other comments are very thoughtful. They're all correct. No, they are. They're very thoughtful. I think this issue of expertise is so important to think about. I really do think is a frontier for people in the academy, practitioners. And the Porto Alegre case was you were able to kind of evade the question of expertise pretty well. I think you're absolutely right in the sense that it was it was not complex things that were being decided over, and there was enough training, so it wasn't an issue. That is, you never saw engineers browbeating a community person saying this had to. More often, you saw people citing the book of regulations on how to do a road. But I think as the thing spread and as deliberation moves, thinking about expertise is really very important. So the other book is this one about Chicago and Cordoba. Yes, Peter, I was using the neighborhood associations in Spain sort of provocatively, calling them civil society. But there were quotes in the paper meaning that they call themselves civil society. They were the ones who fought against the dictatorship, and they had the history and this kind of thing. No, they were not super grassroots. No, they didn't include immigrants. Yes, they were homophobic. Yes, they were probably fascist-leaning sometimes. People who know Spain probably know that neighborhood associations often defend bullfights. So progressive peoples have tried to outlaw it in various places, and invariably the neighborhood associations mobilize, defend. So yes, I was using it provocatively. So, okay, so a few things about, but it is funny though, right? There's a civil society mobilization against deliberative democracy. Okay, so the Chicago thing, as Peter said, I was one of the implementers. I met the councilman, Joe Moore, at the U.S. Social Forum 3 years ago, where we were doing a panel, so it was that kind of conduit. I worked with a colleague, and we tried very hard not to have a blueprint and not to do a cookie cutter, but there was a tremendous pressure from the community side for us just to tell them what to do. Just tell us how you do it. And we'd say, no, there is no way how to do it. So there was a lot of, as much as I tried not to be the kind of monocropper that I described in here, there's a lot of pressure to do that. We tried to talk about social justice all the time. So every single talk I gave in a neighborhood in the 49th Ward in Chicago, I said, this is important because this is about popular sovereignty, empowering the people, and redistributing resources from the rich to the poor. And that message had zero traction whatsoever. I mean, it's incredible. This is America, exactly. In fact, so it became, there were NIMBY politics, for sure, in Chicago that came into play. So, for example, there was a dog park was one of the top project people decided on, and the main argument people seemed to be making for the dog park was this is going to keep the homeless people out and drive property prices up. So there was that kind of reactionary NIMBY stuff going on. As a person who respects deliberative democracy, it's it's a tricky position. But then there were good projects too, like Community Garden. There were moments of creativity and deliberation for sure, but it was definitely ambiguous from a social justice point of view. We had a social justice message, and not only did the social movement and the more progressive people drop out of the process, it had a kind of anti-social justice element at the end. And then to get to Archon's point and to Arjun's point earlier about this kind of deliberative, this chain of events. So the Porto Alegre story is out there as an idea of popular empowerment, and that is out there in the people who were coming to the meeting. And I'll just close with this sort of funny story, which was at one of these talks, this guy came up to me. I think I may have told you this, Peter. He was very mad at the way that I was distorting participatory budgeting and the way that we were making this about good governance. And he'd read a book where social movements had this idea, and it was about giving money to the poor, and it was about the Workers' Party, this, that, and the other. And then I realized I wrote that book. And it was, so the Porto Alegre story is out there, but there is something about this context that much as I tried, and I'm very sympathetic to the comments about the time pressures, and I mean, it wasn't just my efforts that made it a blueprint or not blueprint. I think there's another kind of sociological story there. But anyways, thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate them.